this lesson, we're going to look at the difference between molecular and ionic compounds. When we look at bonding, we see there are three distinct kinds of bondings: metallic, ionic, and covalent. Metallic bonding occurs between two or more metals. Covalent bonds form between two or more nonmetals, and ionic bonding happens between a metal and a nonmetal. A reminder that when we look at the periodic table, metals are on the left side of the periodic table with the exception of hydrogen. Nonmetals are on the right side, and they're divided by the metalloids. We won't go into much about how metalloids bond because their behavior depends on what they're bonding with. Which two elements are metals? First, we need to locate each element on the periodic table. So we have sodium, neon, chlorine, and iron. We see that both sodium and iron are on the left side of the periodic table, and they are both metals. Chlorine and neon are both nonmetals. In ionic bonding, electrons are transferred between atoms. And specifically, it occurs between metal and nonmetal atoms. The metal will give up one or more electrons to form a positively charged cation, and the nonmetal will accept electrons to form an anion. Which pair of elements will form an ionic bond? Lithium and fluoride are on opposite sides of the periodic table, so we have a metal and a nonmetal bonding, and that will form an ionic bond. Lithium will give up an electron, and fluorine will gain an electron. So we have a metal plus a nonmetal. When I look at carbon and oxygen, these are both nonmetals. Sodium and potassium are both metals, and sulfur and chlorine are both nonmetals. Covalent bonds are formed when atoms are sharing electrons between two atoms. And this always occurs between non-metal atoms, and we say these form molecular compounds. In this case, we have carbon and hydrogen, which are both non-metals. Remember, hydrogen's on the left side, but it's kind of an outlier over there. It's really a non-metal, and they will share the electrons to form that bond. When we look at ionic and molecular compounds, we not only see different elements bonding to form those compounds, we also see differences in the structure of those resulting compounds. When we look at an ionic compound, what we actually see is an array of ions with this fixed ratio. So for example, NaCl, or sodium chloride, has a ratio of 1 sodium to 1 chlorine. And we won't just see a molecule that has one single sodium and one single chlorine. We will see an array that has many sodium ions and many chloride ions, but they will be in that 1-to-1 ratio. When we look at a molecular compound, we see that these exist as discrete molecules. So for example, CH4, or methane gas, has specific separate molecules, so different CH4 molecules. They don't bond together. They always have one carbon and 4 hydrogens in each molecule. It's not just about the ratio like we see for ionic compounds. Which one is a molecular compound? Carbon monoxide is formed from carbon and oxygen, which are both nonmetals, so that's a molecular compound. Aluminum is an element, specifically an atomic element. Aluminum chloride is a metal and a nonmetal, so it's an ionic compound. Chlorine is a molecular element because we have 2 chlorine atoms bonded together. Cobalt is an atomic element as well.